Hello, and thank you for downloading another episode of Your Life Simplified. My name is Brian Leitner, and today I'm joined by colleague Scott Sturgeon here on the podcast team. And we've talked as an organization a lot about what's going on in the markets right now with the coronavirus and so forth. And Katrina Scott, who's our Chief Investment Officer, has done a great job about letting folks know what our thoughts are. And she's worked very closely with Jeff Crumpelman, our Chief Investment Strategist, Bill Greiner, our Chief Economist, as well as the rest of the investment team. But for the purposes of this podcast, what we thought we'd do is focus on other aspects of planning in life and things that we can control versus those things that we can't control. And so Scott and I were having a conversation yesterday just about a few of what those things might be. And we just decided to hit record, if you will, and have a podcast on this and discuss a few of those topics. So Scott, thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. Excited to kind of talk through several of these. I think our listeners hopefully will find them helpful.
I'm sure they will. Why don't you hit us off with, why don't you start us off with a couple?
Yeah, so I think kind of as we talked about it, just to start, several of the planning ones, or just the big one that came to mind for me was filing your taxes. And maybe many of our listeners saw, typically we have April 15th as the filing date for our tax returns. Typically, most people get a refund from those. In recent news, the filing deadline was extended till July 15th. So, personally, for a moment, I will admit myself, I was like, oh, great, I can kick this can down the road. But on thinking further about it, there are some really profound benefits to filing and even just maybe for your own personal self, making April 15th, that deadline for you. On CNN, 8 out of 10 people get a refund from filing their return, and that refund averages out to be about $2,800. So when you think about, just nationwide, there's some economic ripples going on, a lot of unknowns. Having that extra cash on hand could be really helpful. And then on top of that, one of the added, extra steps you could go from a planning perspective is then based on what that refund amount was, logging on to, maybe it's through your employer's payroll system or just contacting your employer directly and adjusting your withholding amount for the next year. And really our suggestion is to reduce it. So, we think of refunds, a lot of, oftentimes refunds are advertised as being this fantastic thing. When in reality, as many of us kind of joke around in the office, a tax refund is basically, the government paying you back an interest-free loan that you gave to them over the course of the year. So really, for your own personal cash flow, the ability to put that cash to work, just doing your taxes very simply can be a really great step to do.
I think that's great. Certainly, if you're due money, go ahead and claim it now, put that in your pocket or potentially even put that return in the market, right?
Absolutely.
What your goals are.
Absolutely.
As it relates to taxes and kind of where we are today, a couple of different things to think about, but, the market has obviously come down. I think we're all well aware of that. And if we were ever interested in converting maybe some of our tax deferred assets to a Roth IRA, which again, everybody is able to do. You may not be able to contribute to a Roth IRA, but everybody's able to convert to one. If the value of your portfolio in those accounts are less than they were just several months ago, and they likely are, just based upon the way the markets have performed, it might be a great idea to take advantage of that now, because as you may know, that we're going to pay ordinary income on the conversion. And so by doing so, when the market value, the fair market value is less than it was, you might be getting a break. And ultimately, I think most of us believe, the market is going to come back, right? Maybe we don't know when that's going to be. But if we can take a tax bite today on what that looks like for the future growth to be all tax-free and then not worried about the requirement minimum distributions, that could be a real powerful strategy today. Again, it's not going to be right for everybody, and folks want to work with their advisor and their tax professional to do so to see if it makes sense. But that's a strategy that obviously now rings true under the Secure Act, under the where your portfolio might be today, again, as long as it's in line with your rest of your goals. And something else to consider, of course, is that if your portfolio has lost value, tax loss harvesting is probably a good thing to look into. I mean, you want to work again with your advisor, your tax advisor, in order to do so. You have obviously the entire year to do that. But again, it's going to be very specific on your overall situation. So those are a couple of different things, again, from a tax perspective that folks might want to look into as well.
Both really good strategies. I feel like you there's a certain amount of faith you have to do either one. Obviously the Roth conversion being contingent on your expectation over time, Brian, that you eloquently pointed out that the market's going to rise. But I think you're right. It is, especially if you have time, if you're a younger investor and you have time on your side, either strategy could be really impactful. The added caveat I would put, just as you're looking at your individual accounts, just in general, I think I'm glad you mentioned tax deferred accounts, that we think typically about IRAs or 401ks. One of the added things that you can focus on specifically to those accounts is checking beneficiary designations. And, beneficiary designation being, in the event, heaven forbid, that you pass away, where are those assets going to go? And actually, Brian and I did a podcast episode a while back on the Secure Act. Some changes came down the pipe as it pertains to how assets held within those accounts can be distributed to beneficiaries. I won't dive in too deep on that, but it really had some pretty significant effects on the estate planning landscape. And so taking some time to whether to meet with an advisor or an estate planning attorney to look at the beneficiary designations you have on those accounts can have a very impactful, result on what your overall plan looks like. So, if you're stuck at home, relatively easy to log on to, maybe whatever custodian or investment firm you utilize to check what those designations are. Oftentimes now it's simply just a few clicks of a button. You change those or edit those online. It makes it really easy and can be a really good use of your time.
So Scott, that's a great point too. I mean, just to take a step back for a minute, thinking about, those that may have a little bit more time on their hands, or again, they're concerned about things they can't control. Here's a great idea on something you can control. You just mentioned logging on and taking a look at, beneficiaries and making sure that's up to date, which is huge. Not enough people do that. But even just maybe from 30,000 feet, getting organized. Like we all have, different accounts, whether it be insurance, documentation and coverage, or, our estate planning. I mean, so what I would ask our listeners is, can you get your hands on all of your important documents in 30 minutes if you had to? And this might be a great opportunity, I think, as we're all sitting back and reflecting on, what's important, what's taken place. Maybe some of us have additional time to just sit back and say, where is everything and how can I get it organized right now? Because if I can do so today, I know that when I need those documents, not only will I have them, but if I had to organize those or grab those important key documents under a time of grief, it's going to make my life that much more stressful. And I also think that, again, this is something that we can all control. And I think that's what a lot of us are looking for now, which is, when you turn the news on and you hear about the shortage of toilet paper, I mean, I think people are trying to control just that and other aspects, whereas I think this would be time really well spent so that, again, when they need that documentation, they have it, and it'll probably give them peace of mind knowing that it's all organized today.
I like the idea of trying to track it down in 30 minutes. Maybe, being quarantined or self-quarantined, I should say. My wife and I are always looking for things to do. We go on walks, I think, a lot now, and maybe that would make for a good date night. I could just make dinner and then at the end just pause it to her, for the end of our date here in the house, we get to track down our documents within 30 minutes. I'll start the timer. Could be good.
It sounds like a party.
A party, yes, absolutely. No, Brian, I think it's a great point. You hit a good thought there, and it all harkens back to a lot of what you can control, right? Because turning on the news, not great. I don't know necessarily as helpful as people would typically think of. It's I think a lot of entertainment value perhaps, but just not a lot of great news from it, and probably not a lot of positive, mental effects from it either way. So I think the control aspect is, what things you can do directly today to handle can be really impactful. And actually one of those, the added one I'll throw in, that's can be, again, easily done online is pulling your credit report. Pull down, you go to one of the three major credit providers. Whether you know it or not, you're entitled to one free report from each of those per year. And so basically it's, again, just a few clicks. You can pull your credit report, check for any errors you might have to see if there are things you could be doing to boost your credit score. Currently, that's again, relatively low hanging fruit that could be, just a great use of time. So then you can directly control, here in the short term.
Yeah, Scott, that's a great point. And, one thing that just popped into my head is, you need to get your credit report run, generally speaking, when you're looking to refinance. And of course, with rates on the mortgage side being as low as they are today, and they've come down quite a bit, there is an opportunity to refinance for those that it makes sense for. So that might be just, again, something else as you're trying to organize your situation, as you're taking inventory of what you have. Am I paying too much? And, do I have the right mortgage right now? I took out maybe it was a 30-year product or something of that nature, but that was some time ago. And, now with rates the way they are, maybe I want to change that. So different things to think about from that perspective as well. I think that's great.
Thanks again for downloading this episode of Your Life Simplified, which is produced by Mariner Wealth Advisors. And at Mariner Wealth Advisors, we're here to serve as your advocate. We help people chart a course to reach their personal and financial goals so that they can have greater peace of mind that may lead to a more fulfilling life. We do this by always putting our clients first. Because as fiduciaries, we're required to provide guidance that's in the best interest of clients, not in the best interest of a company or shareholders or anyone else. So as you listen to this podcast and have questions about maybe your own financial situation, or would simply like a second opinion, or even you have an idea for a future podcast, please go ahead and email us at podcast@marinerwealthadvisors.com. If you found the information on this podcast valuable, please go ahead and share it with a friend or family member that you think might benefit from this information. And please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and now back to the episode.
Something else to think about as it relates to what you can control is, maybe it's your estate planning. A lot of folks still don't have an estate plan. What's worse is I see a lot of folks that think they have an estate plan and they think it's up to date and in place, and it's just not, because their lives have changed since they've had them developed. The tax laws have changed, the markets have changed, and the people in their lives have changed. So maybe just, again, as an opportunity, walking through this scenario, whether it be with your advisor, your loved ones, and say, is the person that's going to be responsible for X, is that person even still alive? Or are they qualified? Or do we still feel comfortable? Or do we need to make a change? So as it relates to, your overall estate plan, again, this is something you can do. It's very much within your control. And I think gifting sort of dovetails into estate planning as well. So just something else to think about. Again, with the market being down quite a bit, everybody's situation is a little bit different. But if you were thinking about gifting assets, you're gifting stock, whether that be to a charity and donating them, or to children or other loved ones, again, transferring some stock or equities that may have a reduction in their value today. It's great from a gifting perspective because you're gifting at a lower valuation perhaps. And again, if we're optimistic on the market and maybe that particular security, today can be a fantastic time to do that and receive that benefit, in addition to some of the more advanced gifting strategies that are out there because of where interest rates are today and your ability to take assets out of your estate or transfer them to a trust, again, depending upon what your situation is.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think, the two really blend together, the estate planning piece and the gifts. I think typically people think of a quote unquote estate plan as the physical document of maybe it's your trust, your will, your power of attorney, and that sort of thing. But I think when I think of it, it's more so just the whole picture of where are your assets going to make the impact that you want them to make. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be, how things flow once you pass away. Gifting while you're alive, whether it's with stocks or other assets, can be a really great, part of an overall plan. I think that's the big piece that I kind of, I always harp on with people that I talk to, it's not just something that's done after death. I think it can be something that's while living as well.
You bet. I mean, a lot of different ways to look at it, but similar to gifts and donations for that matter. I mean, do I want to see the fruits of my labor? Do I want to see the benefit and the impact I'm making while I'm alive? Or is that something that I want to make sure I have enough and what's left over, X amount can go to loved ones or to a charitable organization? So yeah, great point.
Yeah, really the, kind of in the same similar vein, I think the last point that, at least from a planning perspective that I had, was just kind of the topic of cash reserves. For when advisors meet with clients, I think typically and I think a lot of advisors have different perspectives on it. So there's no finite rule for clients, but I think it's times like this that really put into perspective the importance of trying to maintain a certain cash reserve. Typically we see thrown around 6 months of expenses, at a very minimum, probably 3 months of expenses. So I think it's times like this that if for whatever reason it's difficult to stockpile that for whatever reason, especially now, it can be really challenging. But I think it can also serve as a good point, a good reference point for down the road of saying, maybe I was a little light on cash, I was a little concerned. Moving forward, that's something I can kind of endeavor to focus more on, to make sure I have a certain amount of cash on hand at any given time. And then really on top of that, the ability to put that cash to work. If you, as we've kind of mentioned several times, if the market's down significantly, are there buying opportunities? Maybe, maybe not. But, if that cash reserve isn't there, there's not even the opportunity to do it, to act on it. So just kind of a final point there. But, Brian, I think we kind of chatted that obviously, a lot of planning topics are important, things are good to touch on. Off the top of your head, are there any non-planning things that you've kind of observed or just from a personal perspective that have been helpful for you as we're kind of, dealing with this huge transition in daily life, day to day? Is there any kind of a non-planning topic that comes to mind?
Yeah, there are probably a couple off the top of my head. So right now where I am in the Kansas City area, we're under quarantine, if you will. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to, you have work, the kids are home. For someone like myself, I love to exercise. The gyms are closed, so you can't go out and do those types of things. But for me, some sort of exercise I think is just helpful, right? I mean, it reduces stress and the cortisol level that we have. So anything we can be doing from that perspective, and that doesn't mean that you have to go run 10 miles every day. I mean, simply getting out and going for a walk. I think that's important. Just getting outside and maintaining, the social distances that we've been asked to and so forth. But in concert with that is we're trying to increase our own immunity and stay healthy. And so exercise does that, and eating right does that, and staying hydrated does that. And I will tell you candidly, in the midst of some of this, I've slacked off and I noticed a difference. And so, just trying to, from a self-care perspective, I think that's important. The other one that I would throw out is the media. I think it's important for us all to have some sort of perspective, right? Curate that perspective on things that are taking place. But it's much different than to obsess about it. And I would ask, I think we should all think about how much news we're consuming and what's that doing psychologically to us. If it's just the same news over and over and over again. I read something interesting not too long ago. It talked about the bombing at the Boston Marathon. And this study, it talked about those that watched the news of the Boston Marathon bombing actually developed greater PTSD types of issues than those that were actually at the event, because it's this same conversation that plays on and on and on in our head. So I would caution everybody to understand what's taking place, but just also understand, how much news they're really taking in, and it is too much good for you.
I think that makes sense, and especially being stuck at home, if you're self-quarantined, it is very easy to just flip on the TV and just kind of have it in the background. But I think you're right. There are many reputable news channels and stations. I don't necessarily want to put them down by any means, but at the same time, there's also a certain entertainment value there, and some, trying to captivate an audience. And typically it's, the same types of things, Brian, that you just mentioned, people will tend to hone in on, and it's easy to get kind of sucked into that. So as you're at home, something to be mindful of. Sure. Right?
So Scott, to interrupt you and put you on the spot, you shared with me yesterday something you're doing for entertainment value. Why don't you share?
Yes. So basically one of the things, I am put on the spot here, but basically one of the things I have done that I will admit I thought was a little silly at first. I have done a digital happy hour, and I have another one. I did one last week with some high school buddies. I'm doing another one, I think tonight with some college buddies of mine. But basically I think we used Google Hangouts. We video, chatted with each other. Basically everyone, had a cocktail. This is after 5:00, and just kind of caught up and just talked about kind of the weird times that we're in. And I think initially I went in very skeptical, but came away, number one, having a great time. And number two, just kind of being a little more mindful about the connections that I make with, whether it's my family or my friends, just focusing more in on human connections with other people. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway I took from it. My wife and I think more so now during this pandemic, we, when she gets off work, we'll go for a walk, just the two of us and our dog. And I've noticed in doing so that, number one, it's nice to just catch up with her on her day. She's a nurse practitioner, so it's pretty hectic times in general. But I've also noticed that there are a ton of other people out and walking, as a family after work. And that's significantly more people doing that now than before. And maybe it's, I don't have kids, Brian, so maybe it's part of it's just getting the kids out of the house for your own sanity. But I think part of it too is just kind of, the ability to make connections with your family, things that maybe you took for granted before, really making an investment in that, if you will.
Yeah, Scott, I think that's great. I think that's pretty unique, and it's a sign of the times right now. I mean, we're social creatures, right? So the ability to go out,
sure,
and connect with people, whether it be digitally, and how you do that. I guess one other thing I would add that you brought up, just seeing people in the community. So, one of the things that we can all do that's in our control is obviously help others in the community. There are a lot of people that need it, and I know, in my community as well as others, something that they've done is for the elderly, they've passed out these red index cards and green index cards, and people have put them in their front door. And if an elderly person puts up for example, a red index card in their window, that means that they need groceries or they need something from the store, and that there are people connected to them within the community that will, run to Walmart, run to Target, run to the local food store if they're not familiar with, ordering online. Or I know a neighbor helped another neighbor set themselves up with Instacart and things of that nature, where those individuals weren't familiar with how to do that. So again, it's pretty incredible. I think you are seeing some real positive things in the way that we're all dealing with some of these issues, and ultimately some of the good things that are coming from it.
I couldn't agree more. It's so much of it's about perspective. I think, it's just, what are the things day to day that I can control within my life? And, what things can I do to project positivity for others who maybe are having a really hard time with this? Maybe they are dealing with the illness, or maybe they're having a hard time getting out. Brian, like you mentioned, even something as simple as getting groceries can be suddenly really, really a challenging prospect for certain individuals. So I think you're right. I think a lot of it is just kind of like, what kind of positivity can I bring in general? And, how can I curate a lot of the very negative things that, I think I've tend to see, I've seen over the last few weeks.
Well, with that in mind, look, I hope we've given people some things to think about, whether it be on the financial side, again, things that they can control, and then, other areas of their life outside of their finances, of things that, that they may want to pay attention to. Again, focusing on what's working, what's positive, and in different ways to connect with folks that maybe they haven't in a long time, just like you're doing, at least from a digital perspective for now. So, Scott, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. To all of our listeners, please know that we're here for you. We're here to answer questions that you might have, whether it be about your financial situation or anything that's on your mind, anything you want to share during this period of time. We ask that you absolutely stay safe, take care of yourself, your loved ones, and thanks again for listening to the show.
Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Kansas. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which it is notice filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money.